Well, we have gotten to section 111 to 114. I actually love these sections. I'm going to start out when I was after I finished college, graduated from I guess with my doctorate degree. I was teaching full time at BYU, and I was asked randomly by the church if I would go teach and be the institute director at Harvard and MIT and Wellesley and Boston College and other universities out there in Boston. And it was shortly after my mom had passed away, and I was dating somebody at the time. And I had very little interest in going. And so I actually said, let me think about it. But my intention was just to say no. But as I was trying to decide what I should do, the Spirit continued to work on me in a variety of ways. And one way was simply, as some of you have done in your own lives, and I don't always recommend it, but sometimes I have found that it is the way to go. I was studying actually I was just praying and going through the Doctrine and Covenants because I teach it, but I was studying the scriptures and just opened to section 111 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord is calling the prophet and others to go to Salem, Massachusetts. And this was a huge answer to one of my prayers. I recognized that I wasn't just going to Boston and Massachusetts just to teach seminary and institute and be the institute director, but as the Lord said here, that there are other treasures in the city. Salem, Massachusetts is just about a half an hour above Boston, and I was actually assigned to be over that area. I found a lot of family history there, and I found a lot of family history from my now husband there, although I was not married to him at the time, and found that the Lord is in control. So the testimony of these scriptures, and sometimes, although not everything applies, especially the application, doesn't necessarily apply, but sometimes it does. And sometimes the Lord can actually use words and phrases meant for somebody else to directly apply to us. So first of all, Joseph was assigned to go, asked of the Lord or commanded of the Lord to go to Salem. So a little bit of the background is they were in financial distress in Kirtland. The prophet, Sidney, Hiram, and Oliver all made this journey together, trying to find money for some of the issues, but they also recognized that there was a lot of history, especially regarding the Pilgrims and their family. They found so much persecution and probably a lot of things in common with how they were feeling. But they were not able to find the finances that they thought they were going to find. It was more family history, and also people that were interested in the church. It says there came to Kirtland a brother by the name of Burgess, who stated that he had knowledge of a large amount of money secreted in the cellar of a certain house in Salem, Massachusetts, which had belonged to a widow then deceased, and thought he was the only person who had knowledge of it or the location of the house. The brethren, accepting the representations of Burgess as true, made the journey to Salem to secure, if possible, the treasure. Burgess, according to Robinson, met the brethren in Salem, but claimed that time had wrought such changes in the town they could not for a certain point out the house, and soon left. Clearly they were going for financial purposes, but when they got there, they found much more. So Doctrine and Covenants, section 111, I just have a few questions for you. First of all, why does he go to Salem? What is his folly, or what is it the Lord is talking about here in this section? Then what is a treasure to be found in Salem, especially after reading verse 2, and look at that footnote. And then what was Joseph not to worry about in verses 5 and 6? This is to be very difficult, of course, for a prophet to be in such financial straits to just kind of move on. But clearly the Lord was trying to teach him another lesson. And there are many lessons that can be taught in this. So I just invite you, look at this section, find out the principles, the teachings the Lord has, especially in regards to the Lord's hand in our lives. So section 112 is a section that we have talked about, and a person we have talked about many times before. It's in the study guide as well, so I won't go into too much of it. But it's this Thomas B. Marsh. Thomas B. Marsh was, as we know, the president of the Quorum of the 12. He was struggling with some of the issues at the time, especially again with finances and the leadership of Joseph Smith and some of those things that were taught. But in this case specifically, the Lord teaches Martin in verse 10, "Be thou humble, and the Lord thy God shall lead thee by thy hand and give thee answer to thy prayers." When we're talking about humility, Brigham Young is one of my all-time favorite examples of this. Marley K. Jensen tells the story of how Brigham Young was actually told by Joseph Smith that he was doing something wrong and it was unclear. And then finally, as we see here, when Joseph finished the rebuke, everyone in the room waited for Brigham's response. This powerful man, later known as the Lion of the Lord, in a voice everyone could tell was sincere, said simply and humbly, "Joseph, what do you want me to do?" And that was a reaction of that was a common reaction of Brigham Young with Joseph. He wanted to learn, he wanted to do what was right, but sometimes some of it was a test. So in section 112, just a few questions for you on this one. What does this story from Brigham Young and Joseph Smith teach us about humility? But also importantly, um, what is the Lord teaching us about humility? So what do we learn in section 112 about humility? I love the statement by President Kimball where he says, "How does one get humble? To me, one must constantly be reminded of his dependence. On whom dependent? On the Lord. How remind oneself? By real, constant, worshipful, grateful prayer. Humility is teachableness, an ability to realize that all virtues and abilities are not concentrated in oneself." I really want you to spend some time analyzing the the combination or the correlation between being humble and prayer, and why it is that when one is dependent upon the Lord, that they are more likely to be humble. And with the Bible dictionary talking about prayer, specifically when we understand our relationship with God, we are more likely to be speaking with Him and praying. What is it? What causes that? What have we learned about prayer? What have we learned about humility in the past that will help us do that? I love this statement as well by John Ruskin, where he says, "The first test of a truly great man is his humility. I do not mean by humility doubt of his own power, but really great men have a curious feeling that greatness is not in them, but through them. And they seem something divine in other men and are endlessly, foolishly, incredibly merciful." Just to think about that importance of humility and what we can learn. We know the story of Thomas B. Marsh and the striplings, and I have a little bit of that in the study guide as well, and you can read about that throughout the readings for this course. But I want you to think about Joseph in comparison to Martin Harris, or to Thomas B. Marsh, and how they both demonstrated humility or the lack thereof, especially in regards to Thomas. But here's a statement from a gentleman named Daniel Tyler, who was an associate of Joseph Smith. He walked upon Joseph Smith while he was in a schoolhouse and saw him praying. And he says, "Entering the schoolhouse a little before the meeting opened and gazing upon the man of God, I perceived sadness in his countenance and tears trickling down his cheeks. A few moments later, a hymn was sung, and he opened the meeting by prayer. Instead of facing the audience, however, he turned his back and bowed upon his knees, facing the wall. This, I suppose, was done to hide his sorrow and tears." And Tyler continues, "I had heard men and women pray, from the most ignorant, both as to the letters and to intellect, to the most learned and eloquent, but never until then had I heard a man address his Maker as though he was present listening, as a kind father would listen to the sorrows of a dutiful child. Joseph was at that time unlearned, but that prayer, which was to a considerable extent in behalf of those who accused him of having gone astray and fallen into sin, was that the Lord would forgive them and open their eyes that they might see aright. That prayer, I say, to my humble mind, partook of the learning and eloquence of heaven. There was no ostentation, no raising of the voice as by enthusiasm, but a plain conversational tone, as a man would address a present friend. It appeared to me as though, in case the veil were taken away, I could see the Lord standing facing his humblest of all servants I had ever seen. It was the crowning of all the prayers I had ever heard." That was quoted by President Faust. I just wonder if we really understand the strength and the power that comes when we build our relationship with Heavenly Father and turn to Him in prayer with a humble heart. Do we recognize that He really is listening? I testify to you that He is. But so much of our relationship with the Lord and so much of our understanding of what He is doing has to do with our own humility and our own diligence in prayer and drawing closer to the Lord. I pray that you are learning to pray. I pray that you are sometimes praying with your eyes open. I pray that sometimes you're writing your prayers. I pray that you're thinking carefully and asking it solid questions and asking the Lord what better questions you could be asking. I hope that you are diligent in your desire to speak with God, not just at God, and that you are counseling with Him and not at Him. Our Father in heaven is listening to our prayers. He wants to help us and He wants to guide us. President Monson said the following about prayer. Again, it's in your study guide. He says, "Prayer is the provider of spiritual strength. It is the passport to peace. Prayer is the means by which we approach our Father in heaven who loves us. speak to him in prayer, and then listen for the answer. Miracles are wrought through prayer. I just simply testify that that is the case, that we can go to the Lord in prayer and that he really is a part of that conversation. Martin Harris really struggled. And again, we could talk about this in the study guide that you have as well, but he left the church for quite a while and after 18 years comes back, and he says he really did endure what he said, hell. And in this case, this is what he says: if you want to see the fruits of apostasy, look on me. And later he said, I want to die in the church. Oh, if I could see Joseph and talk with him and acknowledge my faults to him and get his forgiveness from him, then I would be happy. I would die happy. On another occasion, he said, speaking to the saints in 1857, my voice never was very strong, but it has been very much weakened of late years by the afflicting rod of Jehovah. He loved me too much to let me go without whipping, for if he had not cared anything about me, he would not have taken me by the arm and given me such a shaking. I was a very stiff-necked man. I have learned to understand what David said when he exclaimed, I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. So he definitely understood what it was like and the struggles involved with apostatizing and then coming back to the church. The Lord will forgive, and he did forgive, but Martin Harris really did go through hell as he was going against the prophet in a very cruel manner, but then recognizing the beauty of coming back into the church. So just want to just share with you a timeline per se. I'm looking at 1836. So on March 27th, we have the dedication of the temple. We already saw that, section 109. Then section 110, we see the keys that are restored by Moses, Elias, and Elijah. Then in 1836, July through August, Joseph goes to New York City and then to Salem and search for funds. Then we receive section 111, as we already talked about. 1836 is November. The Kirtland Bank is starting. And then we see in 1837, we have the Kirtland Safety Society. This becomes a huge deal because members of the church are putting their money into the Safety Society, kind of like a credit union, and it belongs just to the members who are putting it in there. So in February of 1837, we started having problems with the Safety Society. Polygamy is just beginning to start. Members of the church are getting very frustrated. They're planning on appointing David Whitmer as the head of the church, and we're seeing this idea of Joseph being a fallen prophet. That's where the Panic of 1837 hits in Ohio specifically. Joseph is not able to continue to pay his creditors. A lot of the members lose their money. They don't have money to be purchasing items from the store, and they've lost those goods as well. In June, Heber C. Kimball is going to be called on a mission, and this is what kind of builds that frustration in Thomas B. Marsh's. Joseph is calling missionaries on missions, and Thomas thinks it should go through him, not realizing that the prophet is in charge regardless of the calling of the member of the 12, especially the president of the 12. So in 1837, we see the apostates coming in and breaking into the temple and really causing a struggle there. Then November of that same month, the Kirtland Safety Society finally closes its doors, recognizing that they don't have the financial backing. Then January of 1838, the prophet flees and escapes. And then March finally of 1838, Joseph is going to arrive in Missouri, which then leads us to section 113 of the Doctrine and Covenants. So section 113 of the Doctrine and Covenants, we see the Lord talking about the stem of Jesse, the rod therefore, and all of that. This is in far west Missouri, March 1838. So here's your map, first of all, so you can see that, where they're going to and from. So we see far west Missouri right there in the middle. Then we have section 113, and just for you to be asking this question, who is the stem of Jesse, who is the root of Jesse, and then this quote by Bruce R. McConkie, which follows. And what do we learn about Joseph and his responsibility? I love that Elder McConkie says, those whose ears are attuned to the whisperings of the infinite will know the meaning of these things. That leads us finally to section 114, to a very righteous, good, solid individual, David W. Patton. So David W. Patton was sometimes known as Captain Fear Not. He was one of the apostles. He served in the South against the persecution. He returns to far west, where he received section 114 in April of 1838. He led the saints against the Missourians in 1838, but he was shot in the abdomen, leading a charge at Crooked River, and he died after several hours of intense suffering. We learn more about that in section 124, verse 30, if you want to go there and learn more about that. Section 114 is extremely important, and it helps us to understand the history and the well-being of someone such as David W. Patton, which we'll hit in a few more sections. But this is a statement, as you see, Life of David W. Patton, and then the history of Joseph Smith. David made known to the prophet that he had asked the Lord to let him die the death of a martyr, at which the prophet, greatly moved, expressed extreme sorrow. For, said he to David, when a man of your faith asks the Lord for anything, he generally gets it. And then, as we see from the Joseph Smith story, our history, Brother Patton was buried this day at Far West, and before the funeral, I called at Brother Patton's house, and while meditating on the scene before me in the presence of his friends, I could not help pointing to his lifeless body and testifying, there lies a man that has done just as he said he would. He has laid down his life for his friends. So Joseph's relationship with David W. Patton is extremely important. He died as a dear friend of Joseph. And we compare that to maybe Thomas B. Marsh, who started as a dear friend and left the church. Thomas came back after Joseph had passed away or was martyred. And you look at these relationships between Joseph and these other people and the influence that they had even on the prophet and other people. And a question for you is, what influence do you have? What is your relationship like with the prophet? Would he consider you a dear friend, a loyal friend, an obedient friend? And what about Jesus Christ? How would he discuss you? And how would you discuss Christ or the prophet with other people? Are we loyal and true to the prophet and to the Lord? Or are we struggling with jealousies of other people, or trying to put down or trying to correct in a sense? These sections are ripe with major discord as we start with section 111, 112, 113, 114. And it really is about the individual and the individual's faith and humility and what they're willing to consecrate to the Lord. And that's what we're going to see continuing on with these sections 115 and on, is this idea of consecration to God. I pray that we can be humble, that we can listen to the God's voice, we can recognize him and act accordingly. And I say that without an invitation in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.